you guys for making time to discuss race and representation as it relates to sports and specifically volleyball. I really appreciate you guys making time for this. Before we get going, I'm just going to introduce each of you. So first, on the bottom left, for me at least on my computer, is Sharon Clark. She's the president of AVCA and the current head coach of Butler Women's Volleyball, where she's been the head coach for the last 21 years. Then there's Jen Fry, former Division I coach and the founder of Jen Fry Talks, which is a social justice firm that facilitates conversations with an anti-racist lens on topics relating to race, inclusion, intersectionality, diversity, and equity. And then we have Rachel Adams, who was a two-time All-American middle blocker at the University of Texas. She won a bronze medal with the USA Women's National Team in the 2016 Olympic Games. She's currently on the USA Women's National Team, and she's the founder of Journey Strength, which is a platform that encourages wellness and growth. So thank you all for being here. Before we get into this whole discussion, I was hoping, Jen, that you could quickly define race, racism, and whiteness for everybody.
Yeah, so whenever you talk about these subjects, you always want to make sure that there's a foundation so that we're all coming from the language at the same lens. What tends to happen is that some people think of things in different words, different definitions, and that's where kind of you see some people button heads. So when we're going to talk about race, we're going to talk about as a socially constructed system based on particular phenotypical characteristics like skin color, skin texture, bone texture, hair texture, those type of things. Things are more that you can see. That's what we look at when we're talking about socially constructing people. Race does not have anything to do with biology. If you did a DNA test or if you did a paternity test, you would not see race, i.e. black or white. The next thing we talk about is with racism, and this one's a little harder for people to understand. When we're talking about this one, we're talking about as a system, not a person. So racism is a system in which one race maintains supremacy over another through attitudes, behaviors, social structures, and institutional power. It is not a person with a KKK hood on. It is a system. And we have to interrogate the systems a lot more instead of thinking it's a person. And since we're not that person, then we can't be racist. And so to kind of give you an idea, there's three structures within it. You have structural, institutional, and individual. You have structural racism, which is like redlining, essentially what the government did. They put lines around different areas, and the red areas where people of color live, they couldn't get loans. They were food deserts, housing, property, the cost of it just dropped. Then if you looked at the green areas, and that's where more white people live, and that's where you saw housing was shooting up. They had restaurants, grocery stores, all that type of good stuff going on. Then you see Japanese internment camps, Social Security Act, which essentially said domestic and agricultural workers were not allowed retirement or any of those other government benefits. And then the GI Bill exclusion, which essentially when the soldiers came back from World War II, they weren't able to get access to home loans. 98% of the home loans went to white people, 2% went to people of color. So right there, you saw the wealth gap go due to structural racism. There's kind of an idea of redlining right there. And then we also see the GI Bill, which this was supposed to be for all people coming back from war, but really only helped people that were white. And then we see kind of the last part, which is individual stuff, microaggressions, saying that, why can't I touch your hair? You talk white, you're a black girl that's white in the inside. Where are you from? You have an accent, you're not from here. Cultural appropriation, having those parties of like a gang party, a Hispanic party, Asian party, those type of things. Hate speech, and then discrimination. And then the last thing we'll talk about is whiteness. And this is the academic term that encompasses all aspects of white privileges, include ideological, institutional, social, cultural, historical, political, and interpersonal. It's asking who's writing the history books, whose historical figures are being talked about more or talked about less. It's the idea of what hairstyles are appropriate. If you Google professional hairstyles like this, it's going to show all white men. If you Google unprofessional, it's going to show more people of color. Same thing with women. Professional hairstylists for women are going to be more white women, straight hair type of hairstyles. And then if you Google unprofessional hair for women, it's going to show all people of color. So asking the question of who gets to decide what's professional, what's not professional, what's appropriate to wear, what's not appropriate to wear, and those type of things.
Awesome. Thank you. So in the discussion with whiteness, I'll kind of open this question up to Sharon and Jen. How do you see this as this relates to coaching and athletics?
Sharon, you want to hit that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that I don't think the sport of volleyball or sport in general is any different than society. I mean, volleyball is a microcosm of society, and it's, you know, it's being played by the majority race, which is white.
Did you freeze? Did we freeze?
Quite a few different races that play it, but there's a way to walk, just movement in general, and I think people are used to that. I think that now that we are gaining a little momentum and getting more people of color playing the sport, people are recognizing that there are differences in some of the things that Jen has just said. So skin color and hair and all of those types of things. And that doesn't make you any better or any worse of a volleyball player. I definitely feel that we have some systemic stuff going on in the sport of volleyball. And that comes mainly from our inability to keep it in at all socioeconomic levels, and our inability to keep volleyball being played in all areas of the country. You know, there's some very, very diverse areas, some very Black areas, very Hispanic areas, some very Asian areas where volleyball is not being played. We don't have expertise in those areas, and we don't have funding going there to allow them the same opportunities as their white counterparts in other parts of the country. So I would say from a coaching perspective, you know, that's where I would start with it. I think, you know, a lot of our college teams are still very white. And I think that we've got to continue to work on what I call the browning of volleyball, and helping more people of color get into the sport through the ranks and get the privilege that all of us have gained from volleyball.
So I come at from like a little more of a theoretical lens, in the terms of like, what I see about whiteness in the volleyball community is this lack of wanting to talk about whiteness in the volleyball community. You know, people do not want to talk about whiteness and what it means to them and who they coach. So when you bring up this idea of being white and that has a lens for you, they want to push back. No, I treat everyone the same. I love everyone the same. I have a Black player, an Asian player, a Samoan player, but I don't see color. And so this idea that they want to say they don't see this stuff that they just listed, or that they don't see it because they treat everybody the same. In reality, we all have biases and stereotypes, and you can't treat anybody the same. If you ask even a parent, they can't treat two kids the same. So how can I expect you to treat a team of diverse populations different or the same? And so I just think we need to think a little bit more critically about what whiteness is and the lens it gives our coaches, and what it means to be able to protect our athletes of color, because they don't want to admit that they have biases. They don't want to admit that whiteness is giving me a different viewpoint. And because they don't want to admit it, then they don't want to admit that, well, maybe how I've been treating my athletes of color truly isn't making them safe, isn't making them comfortable. And that's a really hard thing to rectify with, is to say, now I'm realizing I have this view. And because I have this view, I realize I'm treating people differently, a lot more different than I ever thought I was. And that's a hard thing to rectify with. So if we're going to talk about whiteness in athletics, it has to be that white people aren't asking Black people to talk about Blackness. It's white people are asking other white people to talk about whiteness.
Okay, thank you guys for that. So Sharon, you recently wrote a powerful letter through my lens to the AVCA community. Can you, for those that didn't read that letter, can you kind of elaborate and give us a little bit more insight in terms of your experience as a Black head coach in a predominantly white sport?
Sure. You know, I mean, I grew up on the West Coast in California and Hawaii, and so came into volleyball pretty early and young. You know, I have always felt alone at me playing the sport. And so, you know, in the letter that I wrote to the volleyball community, I just felt like it was an opportunity for me to give some perspective to a lot of people who lack perspective on race and color in the sport of volleyball. And by that, I mean, you know, I wanted them to know that from the time that I started playing, you know, in middle school until now, and I'm, you know, over 50 years old, that the racial bias continues to go in just the most regular and average way that they would never think of. You know, one of the things I wrote in there was about things that happen every day, road trip here, whatever, like the comment that I made that, you know, how many times have I gone to the airport and go up to the gate agent, you know, to check my team in, and for them to ask me, where's the head coach or who's in charge? And I'm literally thinking, don't you see me standing right here in front of you with 20 tickets? Like, oh, you're looking for my white assistant, the male white assistant, right? So I think those types of stereotypes are still very strong and prevalent. And I think volleyball has just really, lived in a bubble for a long time, and they act like this stuff isn't there. It's not happening. They don't want to, as Jen said, dive into the dialogue. And by that, it just makes it easy for them to continue to not do the work that's required so that our young, boys and girls, our brown boys and our black girls feel good when they're playing the sport and feel valued and feel respected and don't feel like they're still the only one or one of a few. And the part two for me was really more about a call to action. I feel like as the president right now, I have a responsibility to use the platform to request some things of the volleyball community. We certainly can afford it. The volleyball community is a wealthy community. And by that, I mean, it's a multi-billion-dollar industry, from youth sports, from club, all the way up to our national team. There's billions of dollars spent on the sport of volleyball. And we've taken no responsibility to be inclusive and include anyone else into that. And I wanted them to really step back right now at this time when we're reflecting on a lot and recognize that as a sport, we can do better and we need to do better.
Yeah, so one of the things you kind of touched on there was representation. And I know, Rachel, you have a partnership with Adidas, and I know representation is something that has impacted your career. Is there anything you want to add to what Sharon is saying in terms of the player's perspective?
Yeah, I mean, she touched on a lot, and I definitely believe representation matters, especially in a sport where it is populated by the white community. I remember the first time Adidas became a sponsor and someone took a video of like the booth that is at the conventions, and I remember being like, oh my God, like there's no one that looks like me. There's no one that little Rachel could see in the booth when she was playing volleyball at that age and be like, oh wow, like she can do it, I can too. And I wasn't sponsored that at that point, but in that moment I was like, I need to work for Adidas. I want to work for Adidas. Like we need to get our pictures up there and give them something, because representation matters. Like people say it, but a lot of people don't understand, especially maybe in the volleyball community, because you don't notice if there isn't a black girl if you're white, it just feels like it's normal. But going through this time, like you said, as coaches, I don't always know a coach perspective, but just hearing coaches react in different ways to this time, it's very eye-opening at their responses and just being like, wow, like just, I know everyone's learning, but just seeing how different coaches react to everything across the board. So you're very spot on with maybe like the color blindness and not treating, saying like all players are the same. I don't see anything. But I think a lot of eyes have been open, thankfully. It sucks that it took this long, but yeah, everything that you guys are saying is spot on. And so coming from players and coaches speak, yeah, you guys are very spot on.
Caitlyn, one thing I will say, in response, this is what I say when people say, I don't see anything different, I treat everyone the same. And my point to them is, do you have perspective of what it's like when Rachel's playing for you? Have you ever talked to her? Have you ever seen it through her lens? Have you ever gotten an understanding of what practice is like, or being in the locker room and someone is asking you about your hair, or, those kinds of things? And the irony is, what happened to me as a player in 1989, 88 is still happening to players in 2020. So, and it's vivid. It's, again, like I can remember being on a road trip with my teammates, and we were going to play at the Air Force Academy. And we had landed and got in vans, and we're driving from the airport to there. And I whip out a magazine. I whip out a Jet magazine. I had an Ebony, a Jet magazine. And one of my teammates is like, oh my God, Sharon, like, why do you always read those little black magazines? And like in that moment, you know, as a player, again, like you're usually by yourself, and Rachel's lucky, there was more around her. But now I could have just went off and been like, why are you always reading, you know, Elle magazine? You know what I mean? Like I really could have gone there and said, you should read it. You should try it. There's some really good stuff in here. You know what I mean? Like, and everybody's going to respond and react different. But that in and of itself let me know like how sheltered that person was, like how you really don't have any global sense of what's out there in the world and what other people like. And the other thing is, you know, people try to knock kids of color for doing things that are theirs. There's nothing wrong with the Ebony magazine, just like there's nothing wrong with the Jewish Community Center, right? No one ever says, oh my God, why do you go to the JCC? You know, why are you playing CYO? Why are you all in the Catholic stuff? No one ever says that. But if it's a black thing, or if it's all Hispanic, like it's so easy for people to say that. And that's because they don't have any perspective about your lens and what that means and like what your day-to-day is when they're in it with you every single day.
Yeah, so and that kind of leads to my next question. So examples, you guys both kind of mentioned examples of covert racism. But can you guys, Jen and Sharon, talk a little bit of more examples of covert racism that might not be seen as overt racism? So like you're talking about with the microaggressions with the you reading that magazine or colored blindness. What are some more examples that administrators or other colleagues have used?
You're muted.
I think first, assuming that all Black people are poor, all Black people come from single families, you know, like this idea, you can't afford this, you know, oh, is your dad not in the picture? I know that there was one sports information director I was talking to was telling me about a time somebody that they knew wrote an article about a football player giving the assumption his dad was not in his life, and his dad been in every single game. And so those type of things, having those you know, bold assumptions that we're all poor, we're all coming from single families, you know, the idea of curly hair is not good. Oh, why don't you straighten your hair? You look so good with straight hair. I'd love to see how long your hair is straight. And it's like, I'd love to see how short your hair would be curly. Like, we don't say that type of stuff. That just, it sounds ridiculous. And so, but it's acceptable to think like that. I think the thing also, I would say, whenever Black people speak articulate, it's like, oh, she sounds so white, you know, that type of thing. And why are you only saying maybe your Black players are articulate or eloquent, things like that. So thinking of kind of like, am I comparing this to a white person and giving the idea that what the quality is a white quality? Because the main people don't think about that. It's just like, well, I didn't mean any harm. Well, if you're saying I talk white, well, your assumption then is that all Black people are intelligent if they talk. And the only way to be intelligent is to sound white. And so kind of getting people to critically think a little bit more about what they mean, because many times they just will say stuff and they've never, like I said, interrogated their own whiteness and what it means to be white. And so the assumption is always that people of color are different. Or I guess the thing that always annoys me is when people will refer to people of color as non-white. And I'm always like, do you refer to women as non-men? Like, we have the non-men section over here. No, it's women and men, but for some reason it's white and non-white, and getting away from that kind of foundational idea that white is the foundation, everything else is different.
Sharon, anything you wanted to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, I think for, you know, administrators in particular in the athletic space, a lot of them do it constantly all day, every day, and have no concept that that's what they're doing. You know, I know that, you know, I've worked at different universities. You know, I'm at a private school right now that costs, you know, $65,000. And the assumption is, well, we can't, you know, the reason, the excuse, it's really an excuse. The excuse is, well, you know, we don't have, you know, a large number of minority students because it costs so much to go here. That in and of itself is a racist statement. So what does that mean? You know, I said, well, listen, my son goes to a school, it costs $72,000. And we're making that happen. There are plenty of us out there in this world, right? And I'm not making 1.2 million. I'm not making 500,000. I'm not. And so it's that systemic racism in their head that leads them to just make those excuses and assumptions. I said, the reality is you could have anyone at this university do if you do the work to go get them. If you make it a place that is great for them to be, that they feel good and they feel comfortable. And I think that those are some of the things. And then keeping things around. And, you know, I'll use Rachel as the example. I mean, as of today, I'm so inspired by so much that's going on with young people, but I'm dead on like 100% behind those football players at Texas and Clemson who are like, get those names changed on those halls. Like, that's just flat out basic racism. Why should I have to sing this song when everybody knows all the racial undertones with that? But you're standing up there every day making millions of dollars off of me, and you want me to stand here and sing it with you, right? So I think it's those things that athletics has participated in for years, and they're being called to the carpet finally as well. And I say that having been a member of the athletics community my entire professional career. I've never been at a high school or anywhere else. I've been on a college campus from my first job till today. And there are things that we have to look at to stop doing and stop allowing to be okay at the expense of brown and black people. Sorry,
Rachel, from a player's perspective, is there anything you want to add? Because you've obviously played at the highest level possible, so have had experiences not only here but also overseas. Just of examples of covert racism that you've experienced from teammates.
Yeah, I mean, I've experienced it, you know, pretty much my whole life, and I didn't have a label for it. You know, I went to Catholic grade schools, Catholic high schools, and then I joined volleyball, and I've been on like all white teams. And then I gravitated to Texas because I remember being like, wow, girls that look like me, a campus that's diverse, I want to go here. You know, after so many different types of visits to college campuses, and I was like, wow, like this is, you know, I feel good here. But I mean, it's from like, can you teach me how to twerk, or being like an experiment, you know, with your hair, and like, you know, teaching people like you can't just grab people's hair, or, you know, it's, you know, why do you talk white? I remember I was in high school and a girl like tapped me on my shoulder, and I turned around and she's like, why do you talk white? You know, and like, I didn't have an answer for it then, you know, I was just like, what kind of question is that? Like, what am I supposed to talk like? I'm black, I'm talking, like, what does that mean? But, I mean, you also see it when playing on professional teams overseas, like, you know, Americans at least kind of know, but overseas, like, they have no idea. I remember I was in Poland with my team, and the Jay-Z song with Kanye had come out, and we were in Paris, and one of my teammates had seen like an African family at a table at the hotel, and they're like, oh my God, like, you know, N-words in Paris. And I was like, how do you explain this one? You know, I'm like, yeah. You know, it's not okay to say. She's like, what do you mean? I'm like, okay, where do I even begin? You know? So, I mean, it's everywhere, and yeah.
And so going off of that, for this question is really for everybody. What are some ways you feel that you have actually felt supported by white coaches, teammates, administrators, etc.?
Yeah, I mean, I can. Is someone else was gonna go? Sharon?
No, you go, Rachel.
Yeah. Obviously, going to Texas, I've always felt supported. I don't know if it's in the language or having an assistant coach that was Black and understood and made sure that she was aware, like if something was said, like, you know, be like, hey, that's not cool, or things like that, like trying to make that bridge. But I'm still trying to answer the question of how to feel supported, because coaches do have questions now. Like, oh, like, how do I support my Black athletes? So I'd love to hear from coaches, because like I still don't have that answer, and I don't remember anything that was just outwardly like, hey, I'm here to support you. I know your lens is different. Like, here I am to help. So honestly, I haven't experienced anything like that before, this period where people are kind of reflecting to be like, okay, how do I have Black athletes? How do I support them?
I would probably say the first thing is that they have to do the work themselves.
Mm-hmm.
Like, you can't understand Blackness until you understand whiteness. And so you can't understand how to fully support me unless you've started critically analyzing your whiteness, because then you're starting to see more of what's doing wrong. So I think that's a way of being supportive. If I have friends who are like really analyzing themselves and digging into themselves and starting to critically see the things that they thought were right but actually doing wrong, I think it's coaches willing to say that these certain things we don't stand for it, and when they hear it or see it, they immediately cut it. Because so many times white coaches are afraid to say something, so they'll come in super passive. Well, I mean, they weren't really meaning, and versus saying like, that is not acceptable here. And if it is, and if we hear you do it again, this is the consequence. And putting their foot down with it. You know, putting their foot down with white athletes singing the N-word. Immediately put, not just, well, maybe, but like putting their foot down. I think that's the thing, is that you have to be willing to set a standard that these things, these type of comments aren't acceptable. And so to me, that's how I felt supported, and you support other your student athletes, and also asking them like very poignant questions of, you know, is there anywhere on campus you don't feel comfortable? Are there any faculty you don't feel comfortable with? Any administrators? Like, you know, as a Black female on campus, how are you feeling? What can we as a staff do to better support you? What can the athletic department do to better support you? And asking very tangible questions versus like, you doing okay? Yeah, I'm doing fine. Okay. But like really asking stuff and knowing that they might be the reason why that athlete is feeling unsafe.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I will say one of the things is, in the letter I wrote, you know, I've never, through all my experiences, I've never displayed or said any players, because I never felt like I wanted to put that on them or project that to them. But after writing that letter, one of my very first players reached out to me. She's a deputy AD at a school in the West Coast Conference. And I wholeheartedly felt supported because she has spent her professional career speaking of the privilege that she has and understanding that and making sure others understand that. And, you know, she teaches me so much about how to call white people to the carpet on what they need to do. But she can do that because she's done it herself. You know, she freely speaks about and talks to people about, listen, when I get up to go for a jog, I don't even ever think about where I can or can't run, where I can or can't go. And this is in LA, you know? And so I think that in and of itself is like, for me, I think there are people who have consistently displayed being a good ally and being an ally in this. And that's important to me. That's a way that I feel supported. But it's just as much for me, it's just as critical for the person who I've known for years who said, I don't exactly know what to say, but I want to do better, or I want to make sure that I'm displaying what I need to be doing and that I have a clear understanding. I agree with Jen. You know, I mean, I've said probably 20 last month, it's not my job to raise all of you, you know. There's way too much information out there and everything else. I don't mind getting on your call with your team. I don't mind talking you through situations. I don't mind giving you heads up about whatever. But if you really, really wanted to do it, you can find out as much information. You can Google systemic racism. There's 112 different videos, all the way broken down into Elmo cartoons to explain to you what it is so you get the concept, right? So I just feel like there are a lot of great people out there, white, Black, brown, otherwise. But there's so many people who are talking the talk right now, but they're not going to walk that walk.
Yeah, kind of to jump on what Sharon said, like literally these coaches will watch 14,000 FIVB videos to watch a setting technique. They will watch 20,000 videos on an opponent to know where they hit and shot and chart it all out. But when we're like, hey, you need to learn about whiteness, it's like, I don't even know where to start. What do I do? Educate me. And you're like, bro, I just watched you watch 400 videos. What do you mean? But it's that idea of, because Black people are here, that they don't need to do the extra work, versus saying, cool, Sharon, how about I read 3 articles in a book and can I come back and chat with you about that? Versus us having to educate people and the pushback that we receive. Well, that might be because this is your view or this, versus saying, okay, I need to educate myself. And also a big thing for people that I could call co-conspirators is be willing to stand when you know that you might be pushed down. You have to be willing to stand when you know something's on the line. Because no white person's been fired for pushing for diversity and inclusion. My friend Victoria Ferris said that. You're going to get a promotion, you're going to get a raise, but you're not going to be fired. People of color, Black people will. So acknowledge that privilege and stand up when maybe a person of color in your meeting says something. And yes, I agree with them. Or they say that this was a problematic statement. You're like, I support them with that. Be willing to stand up for them and sometimes in front of them so that they don't have to take the weight. That's what we need people to do. Not just sit and be like, yeah, that was such a bad comment. I didn't want to say anything or argue, but that was a bad, like to me, that's the worst is when you hear something or see something and you don't say anything and they come back and be like, I didn't want to cause any trouble, but Sharon, yeah, that was a bad comment they said to you. And you're like, you're going to let me be in the light of fire and you're worried about yourself. That doesn't even make sense. Like if you're going to do this work and support Black students, you're going to have to be willing to be in the light of fire.
Yeah, and just adding on to that, I'm actually just curious from each of you. I think one thing, Jen, you've mentioned in one of your TED Talks is how important it is for coaches to, I think a lot of times people are reactive. So if an instance occurs, then the coach, if they do address it, it's always, from my experience, reactive. So someone said the N-word and then they're trying to address that issue. And I think one of the things that you touched on that really made a lot of sense to me was the fact that we have to start asking these questions before it happens. So like you were saying, how do you feel in these certain areas? How are you getting along with your teammates? When we travel to this location, did anything occur? I'm just curious, have you guys ever experienced that from coaches or players? Has anyone ever asked before something has actually happened or before it's been brought to their attention?
Rachel?
Not before.
That's a no. That would be a
That's
no.
a no. Yeah.
I think that's a part of the educational process right now, though. You know, I will say, I have respect for the people who've reached out to me. And my first throwback to them is, hey, have you talked to players? You know what I mean? Like Black and white. Have you one-on-one said, hey, tell me your thoughts, what you're thinking, what it's like to be you, blah, blah, blah. And then go back at them in some ways. Like some of the players, like you gotta be like, you know, you need to have some empathy and understanding. You know, the classic thing right now is, for me is, I am not, everybody who knows me knows I'm not like a very confrontational person or fighter, a big, you know, screamer, yeller, any of that. So, but I've been very public about this. When some of the things were going on initially in the first couple of days after George Floyd, I said, I hope they burn it all down. Right. And my husband was like, whoa, back up. Like, what are you talking about? Like, that's not right. And blah, 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 da, da, da. Now, he knows and I know that's not my way. I would never do that. I would never, I'm not on Madison Avenue snatching stuff out of your store or whatever. But on the flip side of it, I understand that type of anger. I understand how people get pushed to that point, how you tip over and you do some things that you never saw yourself doing before. And then the educational part is the majority of the people who are out there doing that don't have anything to do with the cause. These are not people that are marching and doing sit-ins. These are opportunists who are taking advantage of the situation. But I think coaches, if you don't understand what that's like, then you don't get it. And so I try to help them get it. And I said this to officials on a call, and I said this to my own athletic administration. If we start this season on September 1st, and between September 1st and December 1st, every week, a volleyball player comes up missing, murdered, or raped, we would never make it through the season. We would stop in the middle, throw our hands up and cry out like, what is going on? We would be scared to move our teams around. We wouldn't start club. Like the whole volleyball community would want the world to stop and help figure out where this, you know, psycho person or people are. Who are they doing it? And why are they picking on volleyball? Like, why are they doing this to us? So I really try to get them to get that sense. But literally, if a volleyball player every week was killed, volleyball would be very different in this discussion right now. And so I want them to recognize how people get to the point where they scream so loud because they feel like they've been trying to talk and no one hears them, right? And that's what you're seeing right now. And then, you know what, Caitlyn, the one thing I want to say before I get off or before we're done is I want people to recognize this is not a moment. This is a movement. There were movements before and things happened before, but this is a movement that has got to push the needle completely in a different direction. And so those people who aren't really truly in it and empathetic and allies and all of that, this is a moment for them. But the people who really get it and understand and who are committed to doing the work long after all of the optics are done, realize that this is a movement. And you gotta stay the course. I mean, I've been very public. That in and of itself could be dangerous for me, but it's not any more dangerous than a Black life for me, because I have 2 Black men in my household, and every time someone gets killed out there, it could easily be my 20-year-old child. That could easily be my 45, 50-year-old husband. So there's nothing that's more important to me than this topic right now, and volleyball needs to come to terms with it.
I can't believe Miles is 20. Woo!
On Monday.
I can't believe that. Oh, give him a
I know,
happy
right?
birthday. Oh my Lord, he's 20.
I hope he makes it to 30, 40, 50.
Yeah, right. Anything else you guys wanted to add to that question or topic? Rachel or Jen?
Rachel?
Sorry, I was just like deeply listening. Can you ask the question since I'm the third in line? I'm like, what was the main question?
Well, I was asking if you guys have ever had someone reach out ahead of time, but I guess we can just kind of tailor off of what Sharon just said. Do you have any examples of what white people should be doing to support their black athletes and coaches right now and long term?
Yeah, I mean, I love the idea. I would love to have a coach to ask me, like, do I feel safe? How is it traveling? Like, do you feel safe when we go to different countries? Like, how do you feel to be on this team? What does it mean to be Black in America with you and being in a sport that is predominantly white? Like, to ask those hard questions, like maybe they don't even want to know the answers to, but to feel support in that way so that they can try to maybe see through my lens, like even though they haven't grown up that way and they might not totally understand, but ask those questions. Because if you look at the USA national team, I mean, there's maybe 7 athletes right now, maybe 7 main athletes that are Black on the team. And, you know, this is America. Like, it's there's no denying it. And to have those resources and to see the color so you can support the color, and I think would be amazing. But like you said, they have to be educated first on their whiteness. And I know I see a lot of teammates doing the work and listening to the podcast and reading the books, and I do feel supported that way, and actively like coming out at people that are commenting on our posts like in a certain way and just like seeing it now. But I think also as a Black athlete, I can use my voice more. Like you said, I don't think I've used it enough in the past, even though I've seen, I've been living this life. I know there's more ways that I can use my voice, because this isn't just a moment, it's a movement. And I haven't 100% done my part to use my voice as much as I can.
Yeah, I would say kind of like what Sharon alluded to, like, since I'm not coaching now, I'm the burn it all down person. Like, I am that person that is like, let's burn it all down so that we can start with scratch, because you can't develop a new system on an oppressive system. Like, you just can't. And we're not even acknowledge that this system is oppressive. So how can you make changes to something that you're not even acknowledging is there? And I think like why I keep harping on whiteness is, how can you even think to ask me, do I feel safe as a Black female on your campus, if you've not thought that as a white person you feel safe? Like, you can't think of those those critical questions if you haven't been interrogating, what do I get that my Black athletes don't get? What do I feel like walking down the street and seeing a white group of guys? What do I feel like when X happens or Y happens? And if you don't have an ability to interrogate those things, then you can't even ask me those other questions. And so that's what we want, is that these coaches are able to interrogate themselves, because what I see right now is a lot of defensiveness. Why are you saying white people? And I'm like, but y'all say Black people. We can't even say white people. So like that basic part of white people don't want to be referred to as white people because they're not used to being racialized. And when you're used to not being racialized, it's really hard then to become racialized, especially when everyone else has been racialized and it's a normalcy. I don't know about y'all, but there's not a second of my day I don't think about being Black. There is not a time that goes when I look in the fridge, when I look in the mirror, when I look on TV, when I looked at Rachel, just like what you're talking about at Junior Nationals last year. I think I got on Steve because I was like, yo, this whole Adidas thing ain't no Black people. Like, I need to see Black faces just like I'm seeing the Paralympic faces. I need to see them out and proud. Like, you should have someone that has an inclusive lens and say, okay, here are all the pictures we're looking at. Okay, 90% of them are white, but yet half the USA team is Black. That doesn't make sense. And so it's people that are coming to the table with that inclusive lens. But if you haven't interrogated your whiteness, you're not even going to think about saying that because you just don't see that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, is there anything else you guys want to add to the discussion as a whole?
I do want to make sure
we've touched on a lot of stuff.
that we kind of hold the club system accountable. You know, club volleyball is the crux of all of it, and it's the gateway, it's the entry in, and everybody can't get in that way. And so there are a lot of us who will take a chance on that kid who we know we're going to have to put in a whole lot more effort, time, and everything else in to bring them along because they didn't have that opportunity. And I don't actually feel like that's our responsibility. I believe that's club volleyball's responsibility. And more clubs need to do that. More clubs need to move away from the just profit at all cost model, you know, that greed zone of more and more and more. And the more they can get out of more people, more families with more money, and do it just like they do in all other sectors of the country. You know, in housing, there's mixed use developments, right? So there's market rent, and then there's economic rates. And at the end of the day, those folks who are paying market rate are subsidizing those who can't afford to pay that. And volleyball should be no different. And I believe that the club space has to really own some of this as well, and what they're doing to go out and find what I consider my brown babies and bring them into the sport that we all love.
One thing, you have USA Volleyball that charges $50 a person to come watch their kid. And they have this stay and play where now they also have to spend $150 on a hotel room when maybe they could have stayed with the aunt. And not only is it expensive to play, the travel is also expensive. And so when you're charging people to come watch their kids after they've paid $700 entry fee, and they have to stay in certain hotels to be able to play, you're completely still making it too expensive.
That's why we're a country club sport. That's why we're with tennis, gymnastics. I mean, I can name them all. Those are all country club sports, you know, golf. Mm-hmm. Like, somebody has to have money for you to have a shot, you know? And don't get me wrong, there are still some amazing people out there sweating, doing it for nothing, for free, and helping kids, you know, get into the sport. But there's not nearly enough. There's not nearly enough.
Totally agree. Yeah. Anything, Rach, you wanted to add?
No, I mean, I love that. And yeah.
Well, thank you guys. I really appreciate you guys taking the time. I'm sure each of you have been bombarded with people asking questions and for your perspective. For those listening, I just want to make it very clear, it's not the responsibility of any Black person to educate white people. And as we've been discussing, we've got to start showing up to these conversations with the education already taken care of. But I really, really, really do appreciate you guys having this discussion. And again, for those listening, I encourage you to support Butler Volleyball. Follow them on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook. Check out jenfrytalks.com and Rachel's Journey Strength on Instagram and her website. So yeah, thank you guys so
Awesome.
much. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Caitlyn. Thanks for doing it, you know.
Thanks, Caitlyn.
Yeah.
Love you guys.